Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of In Lay Terms. I am your host, Payman Ascari, and we have a great guest today, Mr. Sean Cloutier. Cloutier? Cloutier? I should have asked him
Yeah,
before.
that's good. That's good.
I'm sorry. I usually start the episodes out this way with my foot in my mouth. How are you doing, Sean?
Oh, good payment. And yourself?
I'm doing great. I'm excited about the topic that we're going to discuss today. Maybe we should start by, could you maybe tell the audience a little about yourself?
Okay, yeah, I appreciate it. I appreciate the time this morning, payment. Yeah, so I have an unusual, I guess, background, like just about everybody else today in this unusual world we live in. Spent 7 years inside the university system. Studied sociology, studied history. Spent a year and a half in Quebec City, doing all kinds of research on the Catholic Church. Met some interesting characters that were alive during the French Revolution. Outside of that, professionally, 18 years in the IT world, selling IT equipment, everything with storage, SANs, all the good stuff. So I have that background as well. So a bit of a mix from IT right over to history and sociology.
Good stuff. Before getting started, some housekeeping. It's impossible to get our message out on X. So if you guys could share the live stream, it would be greatly appreciated. Mr. Cloutier has some really good things to talk about. If you have any questions, put them in the comment section, and I'll try to get to them at the end. If I try to do it in the middle of the episode, I'll get distracted, so it'll be awkward. Um, Sean, you and I we were talking yesterday, and you we just met, and you came up with some like the things that you told me are things I never considered. I just assumed the reason academia is the way it is because of Marxism. You got pictures of Lenin and Karl Marx everywhere, but you have a different theory. What is it?
Okay, yeah, Payman. So just a little background on this. I went to school in the 90s. In the mid 90s is when I was in university. And a lot of what people are seeing today, and it's always shocking to me, a lot of what people are seeing today has been going on for a lot longer than what people realize. If you were to go to my website, for example, I wrote a book called Odyssey Awoke. But you can Google some names, like a fellow I emailed you before. His name was Gary Kinsman. And if you go to his Twitter profile and you just scroll up and down, you'll see very quickly that all the discussions around transgenderism, which you guys have come to know called today as wokeism, all the discussions around safe spaces, the Indian acknowledgements, that was all going on a long time ago, back in the 90s. Like I said, when I even earlier, I know it was going on even into the 80s, but when I encountered it, it was in the mid 90s. And for a long time, when I would say to people, I would talk to them about transgenders, transgenderism in safe spaces and woke spaces, and um, people would look at me with their eyes crossed and say, "What are you talking about? Right? What do you mean acknowledging, Indian land acknowledgements and the idea of colonialism, right? All these ideas." And even my brother used to say to me, "Sean, okay, I don't want to hear about this. This is all nonsense. It's a conspiracy theory." So when it came to the forefront around 2016, 2018, it was around that time when people were in a shock saying, "What's going on? How did this happen?" Right. So as a phenomenon, if you will, around the time Jordan Peterson, came to fame, it was all at once for a lot of people, where all of a sudden they saw it in Ontario, a little bit in Quebec, out in British Columbia. There were cases before, like I saw spot cases here and there, but all of a sudden it just popped up. It appeared to pop out of nowhere. And my point on this is a lot of people today are calling it Marxism. They call it, oh, it's Marxism in the universities, or it's socialism in the universities, or they'll refer to it as postmodernism. It is none of the above. Unless you went through it, unless you actually sat in the classroom and spoke to these people and saw what was going on, you would immediately come to the conclusion that these people, straight up, are crazies. They're crackpots. A little background as well. I've read a fair amount of, as a matter of fact, I was reading some of Karl Marx's work this morning. I've read the Grundrisse, like swaths of the Grundrisse. I've read actually up to the chapter of the Working Day in Das Kapital. I've read the Manifesto as well. I've read the German ideology. I've read works from Thorstein Veblen, Emil Durkheim on Karl Marx. I've read his biography, and I could speak about the surplus value, the materialist concept of history, about the class conflict as the vehicle of social change, or conflict as a vehicle of social change. I can do all, but that's not what's happening inside the university system. And I would challenge, just before I even get into the meat of the matter, I would challenge anybody, right, to just ask themselves a simple question, right? You've heard Jordan Peterson talk about the Marxists, about the socialists, and again, these words, Marxism, socialism, they're not the same thing. As a slight digression, Nazi Germany, which were the National Socialists, and the Russians at the time, which were the Bolsheviks, the communists, they went to war. One was a socialist, one was a communist. So there are fundamental differences. That's a different discussion. But I just want to even point that out. People even use this lingo, this Marxist socialist lingo, as if these words all mean the same thing, which they don't, right? Like 60 million people died because of the differences between these words. And they don't mean the same thing. But I would challenge anybody for over the past 10 years to name me one Canadian university professor who's a Marxist. Name me one Canadian university professor who has made a video or written a book about taking over the means of production and turning Canada into a socialist state. They cannot do it because it does not exist. There's no group of university professors anywhere in Canada, at York University, over at Laurentian University, where I went to school. They may call themselves Marxist. They may stand up and go, "Oh, I'm a Marxist or Marxist feminist," but it's just gibberish until you're actually sitting in front of the classroom. For example, I would have a professor, Carol Shushnik, who would refer to herself as a Marxist feminist, and she would just stand in front of the classroom and say, "Men hate women and children. Men hate children. Men hate women. We have to put an end to men's violence against women and children. We have to put an end to women's subservience." This has nothing to do with Marxism. This is nothing. Transgenderism, and the other professor, Gary Kinsman, where you'll see this fusing, where he'll stand in front of the classroom and he'll talk about how that you can have sexual possibilities. There's all kinds of sexual possibilities, or sex shouldn't be limited to just the bedroom. Sexual encounters can happen in public places, public washrooms, public parks. Then he'll call himself a Marxist. And then a guy like Jordan Peterson and all the Canadians go, "Oh, look at the Marxist." It has nothing to do with Marxism. These are crackpots. And that's why I say to people, ask yourself, just go on YouTube right now, find that Canadian university professor who's a Marxist, or who's professing to take over the means of production. You might have a guy named Leo Panich, who's passed away now, over at York University, a self-professed, Marxist, but he's a caviar Marxist. He's making 300 grand a year. His wife is working at Ryerson, 250 grand. Like, these people don't believe in the taking over and seizing of the means of production, right? It has nothing, at the limit, they might be, unionist or talk about union rights, like my other professor, Peter Shushnig, did. But I say to people when they're talking about it, this Marx, and it's very important, Payman, the language. And I'll use an example. I was reading a book, William Doyle, about the French Revolution. And at that time, the people, the bourgeois, the lower bourgeois that wanted to dispense themselves or get rid of the crown, if you will, the old way of doing things, the social privileges, the two-tier legal system, and the working class people, right, the poor people that are getting taxed to death, they all agreed at that time, as he points out, they're using the word despotic to describe the Louis the 16th, right? So their language that they were using at that time in that salon culture, in that pre-French Revolutionary time period, was more exact than the language the Canadians, that Jordan Peterson is using, that Gad Saad is using, that anybody is using. What the real language that, and the language is important that we use, because once you say these people are crackpots, that there's nothing intelligent about it, there's nothing sophisticated about it, that it's lunatics that are literally running the asylum, then you can proceed to fully critique and look at alternatives, right?
Let me
If I
jump
can,
in.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So
First
go
of
ahead.
all, you mentioned way back your website. Can you give the website for the audience?
Oh, it's SeanFCloutier.com.
And your books are listed on the website?
Yes, 100%.
Okay. So now let's move on to the crackpots. I think yesterday you told me the theory you have is basically like the lunatics are running the asylum. You have professors that are gatekeeping. They filter And if you get a normie or a normal person, they don't let you advance. But if you're ideologically aligned with them, they do let you advance. And it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Can you speak to that?
Yes, payment, and that is the meat of the matter. This is what I try to explain to people, which is probably one of the single most important aspects or phenomenon that has happened inside the university system, and that has been going on for the better part of 30, 40 years. And I use it, and I'll try to explain it. I'll use a little diagram using my hands. It's like a pyramid, right? The school system. So you have the high school at the bottom. They all go into the university system up at the top. And what ends up happening, Payment, is I'm a professor. I'm a Gary Kinsman at Laurentian University. And I look at Payment and I go, you know what? You're kind of conservative. You're kind of to the, you're not really what we're looking for, or you're a religious student. Like even today, now people are aware that you kind of have to hide from the professors what you think. But what they'll do is they'll go, you know what, Payman, you're not what I'm looking for. Here's your 6 out of 10 on your paper. You have a problem with it? Go fight it out with the administration. And then you'll have another professor like a Carol Shushnig. You have a group project. Payman, you know what? I don't like you. I'm not dealing with you. I'm only going to deal with the other people in the group. If you don't like it, go fight it out with the administration, right? You have a Peter Shushnig. You're not what we're looking for. We're not going to mark your papers. Go fight it out with the administration. And there's a term to it. It's called getting administrated out of the university. So what ends up happening, and these are all in these, not in the, I don't know how the STEM works, but I just know the political sciences, the sociologies, your transgenders, your literature, your history degrees, right?
Can
So
you, just for the audience, STEM is science, technology, engineering, mathematics, the more rigid ones.
yes, yes, exactly. And so in these degrees, what I call like these crackpot degrees is what a lot of them are turning into, that the professors will come in and they will push you out that way. So what ends up happening is, you can imagine, I'll give you a little bit of a background story on myself. I'm not a tall guy, but at the time I'm 5'9". I'm 225 pounds of muscle. My bench press is like in the excess of 400 pounds. Like I was jacked when I was like 21, 22 years old. My appearance alone at that time was disqualifying me. I literally had professors saying, "You don't look like a student," right? And because I was a very, how do I say this? I was an aggressive student with the material. I was doing a lot of reading on my own, writing, doing my own. I elaborate all this in my book. This is a big no-no. Jordan Peterson talked about this, but like he didn't go into a lot of detail on it. But there's a way of getting through the university where you have to play the game. You have to be the right person, the right look, the right appearance, say the right thing to the professor. Otherwise, you're not going to. I couldn't get my degree because of this. And what ends up happening is that you come through as a conservative student, or you're not playing the part. Your degree turns into an administrative battle with the administration, and they just wear you down until you're pushed out of the university. And that's what happened with myself. My experience was horrific, but every time you get a 6 out of 10 or a C- on a paper or a C- on an exam, what it means is if you need that 70% average to even do your 4-year thesis, you can't qualify. And what people would be astonished on, there are departments now, I guarantee you 100%, there are departments in Canada, university departments, where if I walked in at 21, 25 years old, I will never, the OISE school at University of Toronto, I'll never get a degree from, I'll never go on to graduate school. But what ends up happening, and this is the why I say it's very important, is that in the 90s, and this is to explain that phenomenon, why all of a sudden in 2016, 2017, 2018, all of this transgender stuff, all this what people call wokeism, all seem to explode. Because what ends up happening is that year after year, you'll have a department where they're pushing out any conservative student, anybody that wants a classical type of education, and they're pulling in the students that are going along with what you guys call wokeism, this left-wing lunacy. So they pull those students, and what ends up happening with that pyramid is that those students, they go on, they get their BA, they go on to graduate school, do a master's degree or a PhD, and these are the students that go on to run they become the high school principals, they become your directors of your education system in all throughout Canada, the United States. And it's that process, and year over year over year of pushing out the conservative students, pulling in the students that you're looking for, the crackpot type students. After 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 25 years, they're running the show. That's why when people be surprised when you'll go on YouTube and you'll see a high school principal and he's showing like the rainbow flag, and he's, the guy looks, even physically they'll look odd, and you'll go, how is it that that guy is now a principal at a high school? Like, how did this happen? And I say to people, this started back in the 80s and 90s. And if I can, payment, it is vile. Like, what they're not describing, like Jordan Peterson kind of alludes to it, but when you're actually inside, it's downright nasty. Like, when I got caught up in it, I would have the professors straight up say to me, find something else to do. You can imagine, I'm 4 years into a 4-year degree. I mean, today this is like an $80,000 discussion, and they will straight up say to you, find something else to do, right? So it's it's pretty intense, but that's the meat of the matter. That's what I try to explain to people, and it's not Marxism. It's this process where you go into these universities, and it's year after year. And the biggest problem that I found with it, because I tried to go outside of the university. I called at one point in time, like it must have been around 30 lawyers. I went to the journalist. I copied 300 politicians, physically tried to go down to speak to some of the politicians. Nobody will have anything to do with you, right? Nobody will has spoken about this. Nobody will touch it. Nobody will go near it. Even the politicians, like if you'll hear like Pierre Poilievre, at times he'll say, "Oh, the education, that's a provincial matter, right? That's not my responsibility." Then it goes down to Doug Ford. Doug Ford goes, "You know what? We let the universities do their thing," right? So nobody's really responsible. And what I mean by it's all push and no pull is that inside universities, they will push the conservative students outside the university, but there's no pull. Like, it's not like I go to another department inside the university and go, we got to fight against the wokeism guys, that crowd. Nobody, even inside the university, nobody does anything. They just let them do what they want to do, and it's that's been going on. Like, I know some people, they don't like to hear it. They don't like to hear when I say there's no such thing. It's not Marxism. It's not socialism. Like, Stephen Harper is another person. In one of his interviews that he did in the United States, he said himself, he goes, "It's not Marxism. It's not socialism. It's not." He's still polite and he calls it nihilism. But I go further. I just say these people are just straight up crackpots, and that's the real language that because you're going to have to get angry at this. And Canadians, even Americans, we're too docile. We still like to intellectualize things. We still like to be polite, because if I can say this, it's once you realize that it's being run by crackpots, it changes your mindset, right? Like, it's like that pre-French Revolutionary era. Once you say this guy's he's a despot, our king is a despot, you cannot, instead of saying, oh, he's derived, his power comes from the king of God, or from the kingdom of God. Once you reduce him to a human level and call him a despot, it changes the whole mindset. And that it's that I know, again, I know people get upset when I say that there's no such thing as Marxism, but that language,
Let me let me simplify what you're saying. I call this a purge, in the sense that, like you purge a septic tank or a water tank. They're pushing the conservatives out, and these are the elite pumping factories. Like, they create these elites that go on, as you mentioned, to take over the institutions, and it was a slow subversion, and we never pushed back.
Yes, the payment, that is exactly what's happened. If you look at OISE, for example, it's the Department of Education, the School of Education at University of Toronto. There's a guy in there named Benjamin Levin, and Benjamin Levin was caught as a pedophile, straight up, in New Zealand. The New Zealand police caught him online, saying the most, like, his thing was young girls, right? About, I won't go into a lot of detail on this. People can Google it. But Benjamin Levin was the Deputy Minister of Education in Ontario. And in addition to being the Deputy Minister, he was also a professor at the OISE. And it's a guy like that. You can imagine, and I just try to have people visualize this. You have a guy like Benjamin Levin, who is a pedophile, got caught as a pedophile, right? Went to jail for whatever, like only 10 months. Again, these people get off with, I don't understand it, but anyway, But you can imagine, just psychologically, a guy like myself, 5'9", 225 pounds, totally jacked, and I walk in. Let's just say I walk in with Brock Lesnar or whoever, like a few of the big guys. I am not a pedophile. You just look at me and you go, okay, this I may be something else, but I'm not a pedophile, right? Just by looking at me. And when you get a guy who's a pedophile, and I walk in his classroom, he is, I am never going to get an A plus, right? Like, and a guy like that, Benjamin Levin, who's a professor over at that school, he will push you out. These guys, they search for their own, and they push their own through the school system. Not only that, he was in charge as the deputy minister of education, that sexualized teaching agenda. But then Kathy Wynne goes, "Oh, he wasn't responsible for writing it." And I'm like, and again, it's back to that other rule where nobody's in charge. So he's the deputy minister of education, but he's not in charge of writing the high school or the grade school education program, right? So what ends up happening in a place like Oise, a lot of these crackpots, Kathleen Wynne, Benjamin Levin, Gary Kinsman, Nicholas Matt, the guy from Jordan Peterson's interview, they all come from Oise, this one school in Oise. And again, people will call them Marxist, but it's not Marxism. They're like crackpots in there, that their version of society is so warped that you'll never really fully see them do an interview. Even that one interview the guy did with Jordan Peterson, just listen to the guy for a few minutes. Go find Gary Kinsman's book. Just follow him online, and you'll see, if you go through his Twitter stream and you read his book, you'll see right away that it has nothing. There's nothing Marxist about it.
You know, I was in I went to the university system. I got my PhD, and I never liked professors. I never liked students because like, they're not people to me. It's not like like a single mother or a farmer. You're not on your own producing something. You're just, money is raining down from up above, and as long as it's in the STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, it's okay. I mean, it's still somewhat based, but when you go to these like sociology departments, these guys are just parasites.
Yeah, that's it was like the discussion we were talking the other day, where I point this out, that Laurentian University is a university. It ended up going bankrupt, right? And in anybody with when you look at the financial condition of the university, it didn't happen overnight. If you go years back, you'll see on the financial statements where if it takes, you know, $8 million a month to be able to pay for your payroll, to be able to pay for your professors, to keep the lights on in the university, that means that at the end of any fiscal period, you need at least $8 million in the bank. And the university, on some of their financial statements, didn't even have that in the bank. And so when you think about it, you have to ask yourself, how were they making payroll? And what they were doing is they were regularly borrowing from the banks, and they ended up borrowing, I think, over $100 million or $110 million straight up. And once the banks realized and said, we're never going to get this, money's never going to get paid back, they said, we're not lending you any more money. And as soon as they stopped, the university went bankrupt. And there was some other shady stuff that they were doing on the at Laurentian University. They were taking People were donating money, and they were taking the donations and just spending them. Meanwhile, those donations were allotted for they called it deferred contributions. But my point being is, with all the Marxists inside the university system, with all the IQ geniuses walking up and down the hallways, none of them could just take a look at the financial statements and see that the university was essentially bankrupt years ago, right? So there's no, and when you listen to them, nobody's responsible for anything. Nobody's responsible for looking at the financial health of the university. Nobody's responsible for what's taught inside, and I try to say, for the better part of 30, 40 years, it's payment. Nobody's really cared, right? Stephen Harper, I begrudge him, because in his interview, he said, we have to fight against these people. And I'm like, you were prime minister for 10 years and you did nothing. You insulate yourself, just like Pierre Poilievre, just like every other politician. Because the problem now, that if you were to go into these school systems, you'd have to do like you would literally have to do a purge. You would literally have to go into some of these school systems and say, okay, look at what they're writing, look what they're teaching, and say, this is unacceptable. You have to go. You have to go, right? Like, and even then, there's another aspect of the school system. I don't want to speak about it too much today, but there is a feminization aspect of it, in the sense that And I want to, if I can, if I want to complete this thought, there's a specific type of woman that ends up going into academia, and I've seen this like many times. And the one of the issues I see in the West is that you'll have decent women like an Abigail Schreier who was wrote extensively on this topic, or even a Lindsay Shepherd who I'd like to speak about a little bit on, and they're on the outside of academia. They're on the outside of the government world, where it's more along the lines these women need to have more influence, if I can say so, than what you're getting this wretched form of feminism, which the reality is it's just hatred. It's like this word feminism, where it's like we want equality, we want the equality with men, which of course nobody's against. But the real, if you were inside the university system and see what a lot of this academic feminism is, it's just straight up the hatred of men. And again, they give it this nice word. They go feminism, which on the surface, it seems like, yeah, who isn't for equality? Any man that has a daughter, he wants to have his daughter have a good life, good career, find a good husband. They want their daughter to have it all. No one's against that. But what you're seeing in the university system is it's this wretched form of just the hating of the men. But one of the sad parts when I was mentioning Lindsay Shepherd was that for many people they'll listen to a Gad Sad, or they'll listen to a Jordan Peterson. I don't want to go as far as to say that Jordan Peterson and Gad Sad are frauds, but to a certain extent, payment that they are, in a way, they are being frauds, in the sense that Gad Sad, for example, when he's talking about the woke mind virus, there's no woke mind virus in the school system. Like if you're in these, it's the selection process. It's the needing three letters of recommendation. This antiquated system on how they're determining who goes on to get in the business world. No one gives out letters of recommendation anymore. You just go to someone's LinkedIn profile. And this version of using letters of recommendation, even inside the university system, it doesn't work, right? Because it's too politicized on how they give them out. There's no woke mind virus. And again, when Gadsad is referring to this suicidal empathy, where he's thinking that there's some, and again, Jordan Peterson says the same thing. There's this secret group of people inside the university system where they're struggling. They want the best for society. They want to take resources and redistribute them among the poor, among the rich, to make society more equal. None of that is happening. Like this simply does not exist. This version where these people, it's not that they love the poor, they just hate the rich. That, in a sentence, that's what's happening. So when Gad Saad, he's coming down and he's talking about this suicidal empathy, this has been for 30, 40 years, right? You've had you're almost in a position where you're stuck needing these immigrants coming in. And I'll elaborate a bit on that. Um, Jordan Peterson, when he's talking again about the Marxism, the socialism, the postmodernist, if I can make a pause on that, moi je peux le lire en français, je peux parler en français. Moi j'ai lu Les mots et les choses en français. J'ai lu Histoire de la folie à l'âge classique en français. Like, I read Michel Foucault, swaths of the Les mots et les choses, and his history of madness in the classical age. Most of this stuff is just gibberish. So when Jordan Peterson is talking about Michel Foucault and the postmodernist, again, it's like Karl Marx. Let's sit down and have a real discussion about les mots et les choses.
Well, I'm
Uh,
not much of a philosopher, but didn't Nietzsche say they muddy the waters so you can't see how deep it is? Like they use this like big language, and everyone thinks like, oh, they must be right.
that's exactly it. There's it's a huge problem in that using all that convoluted language, like surplus value instead of just saying profit, right? Like there's in Jordan Peterson, I begrudge him because he does a lot of that, right? Where and again, when Jordan Peterson, I begrudge him because he sat across from Nicholas Matt. He was at the University of Toronto, and what he did, instead of writing a book saying, "This is what they're teaching in the university system. This is what they're teaching. This is who's teaching it. This is the problem. This is the solution." He writes these bullshit books, these bullshit self-help books that are, to make money, to make your jump from being a professor into this because it's safe. And you use those safe words, right? Like again, these words like Marxism. because it doesn't mean anything. But if I can, I'll make two points maybe on this as well. If you read Lindsay Shepherd's book, for the audience out there, if you don't want to, if you're not interested in my books, the saddest part is that there's a young woman, Lindsay Shepherd, who wrote a book, and you could find that on Amazon.com as well. And she explains it. She's talking about how she was harassed by the professors, about all the problems she went through in the university system just by simply showing a video of Jordan Peterson. And she points out how the university professors that she had problems with, they were given a year of absence and they were paid like 150 grand a year each just to sit at home and do nothing while the rest of the world is working. Like, her explanation is superior to Gad Saad, to Jordan Peterson, right? And no one, this poor young woman, there was a time where she was pregnant, and I counted 10 men, 10 university professors that were attacking her online on Twitter. One guy, I call him David Tabarnak, who's from the Nipissing University. There was a guy from Acadia. There was a guy from one of the universities, the University of Calgary, I believe, out in Alberta. And I'm sitting there, I'm going, you have 10 adult men who are professors who are going on X, and they are stalking and they are attacking this young woman in her early 20s, who at the time I believe was pregnant actually with her first baby. And it's like, where are the men, Payman? Like, where, like, that's the meat of the matter. There's nobody, there's no men, nobody's doing anything. No one's,
Okay,
you know.
hold that thought, because now you're going back to feminism, and I want to get there. First things first, if you guys could share the space, I'd appreciate it. If you have any questions, put it in the comments. We'll get to them at the end. Let's go back. You mentioned like we have to go in and we have to reform things at the high school or the school level, public education system. Alberta, I just found this out. In order to be a teacher in Alberta, you in a public school system, you have to go through you got to get a bachelor's in education. So the universities have completely siloed it. So if you want to be a teacher to fix the problem, you have to go through the universities, which is where the problem is generated. Do you understand what I mean?
Yes, yeah, yeah. There's no, it's this circular system. And then even when you have a parent, like there's YouTube videos on this one where I remember very clearly where a parent was complaining on the school board about what his kids are being taught. They just turned off his microphone and said, "We're not going to listen to you. We're not going to deal with you." Right? Like, believe it was in Ontario where they won a court case where the parents could record the meetings between the parents and the teachers because they said before, you're not allowed to record it. When I was in university, and I'm going to date myself, but they had those tape recorders. The professors in class would say, you're not allowed to record. Can't record the classroom, can't record the parent teacher meeting, can't record any of this. It's a circular loop where you go through, they select their own, they push out the conservative, they bring in the woke type students. Like, it's so circular and so insulated, and nobody will touch it. Nobody. I was going back and forth, and I'll defend this. I won't name the journalist, but I was saying to her, I go, why don't you go into the university system and just sit in some of these classes and see what some of these professors are teaching, right? You just go in or interview them or talk to them, and nobody will go near it. Nobody will touch it, right? And it's been this way for 30 or 40 years, and I see no solution to it. People are saying, oh, we're winning against the woke people, we're winning against the Marxist or whatever. I'm like, no, you're not. No, no, like, it's a decline, it's a societal decline, and it's slowly going to continue, right? It's this, until you physically go in and you're going to, what's making a difference now is the technology, just obviously with the internet, with AI, with the means of communication. It's changing a lot. But inside the university system itself, where it's still these people that are going to be, running society more or less, like your human rights tribunals. Ezra Levant has shown that, right? Some of the crackpots that you meet when you run into these human rights tribunal type people, right? Like, my brother worked for the Toronto Police Force, and he said some of these people that were coming in from York University, where they'd have these government departments of like social justice or whatever, he goes, they're literally like crackpots, and they're complaining about like the unfairness of society. But it's, a good example, Payment, and I'll use just to hammer this point home. I always use the example of Elon Musk. we were talking about the other day with the panda, and he was describing the United States, how they were spending these millions of dollars trying to help the panda, and he's saying, everybody loves the panda. The panda's cute. The panda's cuddly. Who doesn't want to help a panda, right? Like everyone wants to help the poor panda. But he said there was no physical panda. He goes, they had like a demo panda, one panda that they would roll out every now and again. But he said there was no zoo filled with pandas where they're like taking care of and feeding or anything. So they're spending millions of dollars on the panda, but there's no panda. And it's the same thing with these words Marxism and socialism and postmodernism, especially the word Marxism. That gets my goat. And people are talking about it, and they're like, yeah, we got to do something about the Marxists in the school system, the communist takeover of Canada. It's the communists are working with the globalists and the Agenda 2030 to take over society and reconstruct society. And I'm like, okay, show me, like the panda, show me this Marxist. Show me this Canadian professor who's saying any of this. It's all in your head. It's me talking to Jordan Peterson, talking to you, and we're all on Twitter and we're going back and forth and we're all spewing this nonsense. But the reality is, and this happens all the time throughout history, the reality is you're talking about stuff that doesn't exist. It's societal decay. We are in a and if I could, it's not Marxism we're experiencing. It's not communism. It's the societal decay. It's like a French Revolutionary type period, or the fall of Rome type period. That's more, and the society is transforming into something else, which I don't want to be an expert on and say I know exactly, where all of society is going, but they that's what we're living in right now. And the language, again, when we're describing this, I believe is important, because until you just start saying, oh, the crackpots are at it again, until you go, instead of saying, oh, look at the Marxist in the university, it's, oh, look at the crackpots, look what they're teaching. Oh, look what the nut jobs, look what they're teaching. Oh, look at the nut jobs that won't let the parent, talk about what his kids are being taught. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying. It's the psychology around it, because one of the problems by people calling it Marxism, or calling it so, and giving it all these fancy and impressive names, it builds it up into something that it's not, right? Like as soon as you start, you go, oh, it's Marxism. You think Das Kapital, and it's complicated and they're sophisticated. And Jordan Peterson is the worst, because I've seen him in interviews where he's pointing and he's talking and he's putting on this show, but it's a show. It's like a one man show, that a circus almost, that he's putting on. Once you change your language and you go, these are crackpots. Look what the crackpots, right? Oh, look what our government crackpots are doing today. My poor brother was paying, like, I think $8,000 a year on his property tax to pay for the school system, and you're paying it to a school system that literally that hates you, right? They're crackpots, right? And or you can find whatever other name you might want to call them, nut jobs or whatever you want to call them. But I say to people, like, and when I do my X calls and I say, when you're on X, and I start saying them, that's not what's happening. People, because it's so ingrained in them now, referring it to Marxism. And if I could step a little bit further on this, because what's happening is you're having these crackpots, and imagine this. And again, I hate talking in terms of race, and in terms of, because the problems are bigger than race or whatever. But I have to talk, because just by the demographics and what's going on in the university system. You have the white Canadian, and it's like they beat down on them. They go, you're racist, you're sexist, you're misogynist, you're colonialist. The only reason you're wealthy is because you took all the wealth from Africa and from India, you brought it to Canada. You're responsible for, look what you've done to the Indian people. You created a genocide, right? So you have all of this pressure coming down on the Canadian, right? Not like, you could even say, even you could be a brown Canadian or a black Canadian, but they're all coming down on the Canadian, especially the white man. All that pressure being put down again and again and again. And it's just these insults, these constant insults putting you down, right? Like, you hear Justin Trudeau, even with the vaccine, they're racist, they're sexist, they're misogynist, right? And what the government does, like a Mark Carney, they build up the other side, the LGBTQ team, and our team or whatever, like these people, You build it up and you go, oh, they're Marxists, they're socialists, they're intellectual. Michel Foucault, Jacques Derrida, all these names and all these books that people have never read, don't really understand, and they just build them up. So you create this intellectual superpower, this super strong thing in your mind. Meanwhile, you're sitting there being insulted on just about every level, right? So it's that dynamic, and I'm like saying, guys, like it's like with the Catholic Church in Quebec, where you had all the values and all the goodness was in the priest, and all the sins and all the evil were in the people. It's the same thing today, where all the goodness, all the values, all the intelligence is all in the university system. It's all with the Marxists. It's all with the government side, and the lowly worker going back in, the Canadian guy paying his property taxes and all his other taxes. There's no value. There's no goodness in that person, right? You just you just go back and forth.
All right,
So
let's put a pin in that because I want to go into the Catholic Church in Quebec as well as the Christian origins of universities. But let's go
yes.
back to feminism. Um, More and more, I'm looking at feminism and I'm like, this is a serious. It was an illness that was unleashed on the West, but it's an ideology or a way of thinking that teaches women to hate, in this case, men, but it just makes them miserable. And I'm looking at interactions between men and women back in the day. It was just it was about peace and love and care and compassion and joy. And now these women are just miserable, and they get unleashed into the workforce. Like these are the women that go into they become crown prosecutors. It's just bitter people.
Yes, yeah, like, and again, that not only do they hate men, and I know before we jump into that payment, I want to be very careful on what I say here, because it's I call it academic feminism, because on the outside of the academic feminism type world, there are a lot of good women. Like like Abigail Schreier, Diana Davidson, Lindsay Shepherd is one who tried. You know what I mean? She's trying to do her thing. So before we jump into that, I don't want to take a paintbrush, and I don't want to paintbrush womankind. Like I got to be. I just want to preface that. However, inside what we're referring to here is this academic feminism, which is vile, which is nasty, and it's not only do they hate the men, they hate their fellow women as well. And I saw this firsthand. I saw it years ago, and I could still, like, I've done some spot checking even here in Concordia, McGill, and it's still going on, obviously. Where one of the problems that I see with it is that eh, when you're going into the university system, right? So it's the first time in history that there's a lot of firsts going on here, where my generation, and I'm Generation X, my generation is really the first generation in history where when we go into the university system, where women have authority over the men, right? You can imagine for the most part of history, or almost all of history, very, very, I can't think of any other time in history when we came in and all of a sudden these massive swaths of women have authority over men, and educate the education system, which is arguably the most important system that we have, that they have authority over the men. And what I saw very, very clearly what was happening was, you come into the university system as a 19-year-old boy, right? You're a 19-year-old kid. And as you're turning from 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, you're becoming a young man. And if you're a feminist and you believe in male female equality, and you think that men and women are the same or should be the same, or that there should be some kind of same outcome, you cannot help but see the madness before your very eyes. And what I mean, you cannot help but see that there's different abilities, aptitudes, and interests between the men and women. And so there's a certain amount of anger, if you will, that goes into it. Like, for example, my professor Carol Schuschnigg, she used to complain a lot about the fact that 60% of the undergraduate students are women. But at that time, when you went to the PhD level, only 20% of the PhD candidates were women. So in her mind, she said there's inequality, and she would refer to it as structural inequality. And she would talk in this cryptid language and say, basically, it's the fact that women go on to have children, and it's not fair that the women have to take time out of their lives to have I know one girl who wanted to do a PhD, but instead she decided to have children. But there is that difference where women's lives are a lot different than from men's, and it comes out of this kind of, and I saw it firsthand, Payman. This is in the 90s, and it's been going on for 30 years, where they're telling the woman, like, focus on the career, right? You've heard this now, like, fight with the men, don't focus on children. And I could remember very clearly, even in the classroom, where one of the girls said that she, I love my boyfriend, I want to make him happy, I want to have a family. And the professor, she would
Let me,
get mad.
let me
Like, it's
just quickly say
horrific.
this is one case where Jordan Peterson said something which I thought was made sense. He goes, we lie to young women. We say that their most important thing in their life is their career when it should be their family or their,
Yes.
to
Yeah,
start a family.
100%. 100%. And where you're seeing this, and I think it's still a bit more complicated. Like, we're still kind of simplifying things a bit, but because there is that economic problem that we're really now starting to face. But inside the university system, where I saw that, and it's this, men do not hate women, and like these theories that they espouse. If men hated women and children that the way they talked, the society would have disappeared 100,000 years ago. Like, is sure, men aren't perfect, God is perfect, but like, just on its face value, right? And even when and this is why I call them crackpots. Think about it logically. It's the white man that built the university that the white man built the floor you're standing on. They built the roof over your head. They installed all the cables. They installed the lights. They put in the air conditioning. They put in the heating. They invented the birth control pill that you took. They, like, everything around you is all built by men. But men do not get angry at women for this, because that's our nature, right? Like, any man that would complain about this kind of stuff, like, as men, we would despise him, because for men, it's in our nature to build, to protect, to do these things, right? I work construction for years as well, and that's what we do. So there's this kind of, there is, in this academic feminism, where they just despise the men. And it's not good. In an unusual way, they hate the women, and they hate themselves as well. And so where you're seeing in this, the academic world, where, especially for a guy like myself, when I was going through, like, and I was told straight up, like, you don't look the part, just because the way I was physically built. But you have that pushing out, and it's this stuff. It's not recent. This didn't start in 2016 or 2018. There's a guy out there, David Horowitz, who back in the day, in the late 90s, and there's YouTube videos of him going right back to the beginning of YouTube in 2005 and 6, where he's saying, you know, anybody that went into a modern university, anyone born before 1955, would not recognize what's going on in the university today. They would not recognize, it's just not the same anymore. They're not sure that you might have a book in some of these classes. And let me be clear on this. When we're studying statistics, is Earl Babby, the statistical textbook, is that a legitimate textbook? 100%, that's legitimate. But once you're in the classroom, and the way the professor's teaching it, the way Carol Schuschnigg is teaching, this is nothing to do, many times it has nothing to do with statistics or anything. And again, there's still that selection process where, okay, I'm not going to deal with you, even though we're all in the classroom together. I had a group project myself where in the end she said, Sean, I'm not dealing with you. I'm only going to deal with the other students in your group, which means I get a 0 out of 25 on my group project, which means I can't get my degree, right? So you run into these kind of problems, right? So on the surface, even though you'll see, okay, the university, and it'll talk about, social justice, Marxism, and then you'll have inside the university, you'll see Earl Babby, the book on statistics. Until you're in there and seeing what's going on, you will see again very quickly that it's not Marxism. And the problem on feminism, Payman, it's a difficult question to answer, because like today, with the birth rate, the economic situation, like, the quote unquote family has just been, like, gutted, right? Like, if you want, I could switch into the religious transformation of the university to the secular, if you wanted elaborate a bit on that discussion we had yesterday.
Sure, let's do that. But first, if everybody could share the space, and if you have any questions, put them in the comments. Go ahead, Sean.
Yeah. So essentially, what ended up happening, how how, and I'll try to give the abbreviated version on this. Most of the universities in Canada, and it's very similar throughout the West, but we'll use the Canadian examples because I know them the best. The inside the Canadian university system, into the 50s, they were all religious institutions. In fact, almost all of our politicians were religious. Like, people often forget, like a guy like Tommy Douglas, the founder of our healthcare system that we love so much, he was a Baptist minister, right? A little bit of perspective on the political side. People would find this surprising, but Pierre Trudeau, Justin Trudeau's father, he was educated by Jesuits, and he had like an intensive spiritual life himself. So most of, if not all of the politicians, they were all religious to some extent, or they were all versed in the Bible, if you will, going back into the 50s. It was the same thing for your university systems. Like, for example, where I went to school, I believe it was the Catholics, the Presbyterians, and the Anglicans, where they had their university system set up in Sudbury. And into the 50s, into the late 50s and in the 60s, you had this massive baby boomer population that was getting set to go into the university system to study, right? They wanted to promote higher education, to give, that generation the opportunity to go, to study the classics, to better themselves. But the governments at that time, what they didn't want to do is they didn't want to go down and give money to the Anglican Church at the University of Toronto. They didn't want to go to the Catholics in Sudbury and go, we're going to give you money, or to the Presbyterians, to all these different religious type, all these religious schools. So what they said is, they said, we want you to create like a front school. So they created a front school, which was called Laurentian University. And they said, we're going to give money to Laurentian University, which is secular, and then it could give out the money to, the religious schools behind. And what this will let you do, it'll allow you to build libraries, it'll allow you to expand your university, open up departments of political science, sociology, all the various departments that we see today. And it was like that all throughout Canada. Not every single university, like some of them, like York University, for example, it was originally built as a secular institution right out of the gate. But what ended up happening in consequence is that by expanding these universities and entering into that phase of mass education, coming out now with student loans, student bursaries, which they had at the time, it made the religious section of the university much, much smaller. Now, as opposed to the religious aspect being an important or the dominating aspect of the university, it became much, much smaller. It became one department among many. And by the time I hit the university system, it was totally irrelevant. So what you had that process where they became fully secular, expanded with all these different departments. Then into the late 70s and early 80s, you'll notice that there was a huge movement where they all became unionized. And in addition to being unionized, these universities were also then engaging lawyers. They were also engaging consultants and marketing firms, how now to begin to attract students to the university. So what you have at a place like Sudbury, where in 1955 you had a Catholic institution, an Anglican, a Presbyterian institution in 1955. With that pathway, by the time I hit 1955, Laurentian University is almost like a business. It's bring the students in, bring the students out. You got guys going for student loans to be able to pay for this. Big push. Everybody should have a university education. And they expanded all these different departments because modern example, you have a large Muslim population here in Montreal. Why not open up a big Muslim or Islamic studies department at Concordia and at McGill? Why? Now you got a market for it. You're going to bring these students in, right? So it's like the market is almost determining what they're teaching in the school system. And when Laurentian University went bankrupt, they cut a lot of the departments and they kept some of the departments open. And their logic was, well, this is what the students want to learn. So it's no longer we're going to teach the Bible. It's what do we have to teach to attract the students into the university for these quote unquote crackpot degrees. And so by 1995, and this is something people have to realize as well, when you're fighting it out with the administration, when you're fighting it out with the professors, they're not by themselves. They're all unionized. They all have their lawyers. So you're having lawyers in the background. My professor, Peter Schuschnigg, he was like the union steward. So he knows full well the game. So when the professors know full well, I'm not going to deal with you, I'm not going to mark with you, go fight it out with the administration, they're never going to lose their job. Nothing is ever going to happen to them, right? There's no consequences. And what are you going to do if you're the university administrator? You're going to go fight it out with their union, their lawyers. So now there's these massive system where there's so much more to it than just the student walking in and wanting to read William Shakespeare. There's like unions, there's lawyers, there's consulting firms. The professors have their unions, their lawyers. You have the mindset of this is like a business. We have to attract students. We can't get students locally because the population is declining. You'll see this in Ontario where we got to bring in the foreign students, bring them in from Saudi Arabia, bring them in from Pakistan, China, wherever, because they need the bodies to pay the bills, right? So like the whole thing, if you step back and look at, and again, I'm exaggerating to a certain point where there are legitimate degrees. If you're going to go in computer science, you're going to go in, you're going to study nursing, like some of the hardcore, more quote unquote technical degrees or STEM degrees, sure, those are still legitimate as they can be. I see it seeping in a bit, even into those degrees. But in a lot of cases where you're seeing these degrees open up, it's to attract students into it and to protect the reputation of the university, like it's a business. I don't know if I'm being clear on what I'm
I
saying.
think that was an amazing expert description of what the problem is, where it started, and I'm actually going to clip that out and maybe we'll make that the trailer. So that was really good. I thought that might be a good place to end this because we've covered a lot of ground, and maybe if you got time, 15 minutes, we can see if there's any comments from the audience.
Yeah, sure. I'd be more than willing to take comments.
Let's see. I haven't really been keeping an eye on this, but we got 45 comments. Rogue Spear, looking forward to this conversation. I hope you enjoyed it. Prairie, good morning.
The Van Gogh.
Sorry?
No, the picture, the Van Gogh, the daisies. I like it. Well, it's not really
Oh,
Van Gogh, but Van Gogh-ish.
yeah, Prairie. She's actually from the prairies, I think Saskatchewan. I never realized there was a Van Gogh element. The chaos agents will use whichever is ISM is convenient to continue the chaos and inevitably leads to the populace begging for UBI. I don't know if you want to, that's universal basic income.
Yeah. Yeah, these are terms where I'm not how do I say this? I'm part of the team right, if you want to call that, obviously. But I don't use a lot of this kind of like UBI and the isms. And I simply I don't see it happening because the government's they're simply not going to have the money. That's a different discussion, the economic aspect of what's happening, but you know,
We got Prairie. She says Francis Widowson, who recently became quite popular, has a naughty list of universities. I don't know if you knew about that.
you know what? I'm aware of Frances Widdowson, and I like her a lot. She's another person out there that's trying to do good. There's an example of another woman. So I don't want to throw like womankind underneath the bus, but there's a great example of a woman trying to do good.
Yeah, there's a lot of good ones out there. You're right. You can't, I guess, you can't just paint it with a broad brushstroke. One more godless woman. It is no coincidence that it was in the 80s that the narrative of everyone has a mental disorder was being pushed.
Can I speak to that? That's very important. That what this person here is saying is very, very important because even in the 90s, when I was in university, the professor Carol Shushnik would use that term all the time, and I'll speak on a personal level. She would say that you're are mentally diseased or you have mental health issues and pushing that on. And when I saw that actually, even in the 2010s, where this notion that everybody has a mental disorder, it's part of this push where like I don't know how many people would in Canada are feeling this, but I've noticed that there's this depressive type mood among the population, and it's the same thing where you're having like the CBC, for example, is a great example. Everybody has mental health issues. Every like the white man is racist. He's sexist. He's misogynist. They hate women. You're responsible for all the evils in the world. Without colonialism, you'd be nothing. And you have mental health disorders, right? Like eat food that's expired, right? Like it's this constant pushing down on all these and mental health is part of it. And if you keep paying attention to it for too long, it'll make you feel terrible. It'll turn into a mental health issue. So this person that's saying that into the 80s, that that that's an important point that I should have brought up as well. But that is true. That was being pushed even in the 90s when I was in university. But again, it's false payment because if you go on the university campus, even when I was there, they're supposed to have a way, right, of if you're having mental health issues or any of that stuff, the guidance counselors. But the problem is that if you go down to the guidance counselor and say, hey, the professor's insulting me in class, right, or they're not marking my papers or whatever, they go, we don't get involved with that. That's not our problem. Like they still don't get involved in any of this stuff. So even I can guarantee you when you go to any of these universities, Laurentian University, you go, oh, if you're having any kind of health issue or whatever, come here. And yeah, they'll go talk to you. If you go, I'm not feeling well. It's, I'm kind of depressed. It's dark outside. Winter's coming. Yeah, they'll talk to you about that, but they will not talk to you about the problem with the professors themselves. So there's a lot. It's so hypocritical, but you know,
They
we can go
pick
on
and
to
choose
another
their
call.
battles.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Next one is from Squirrel Nuts. I'll tell you why I want to bring this up. UN, WEF, WHO, EU, royals, elites, families, etc. We need these eliminated. Agenda 30. My question is, how much? I think I know the answer you're going to give me, but how much of this is top-down, centralized planning, and as opposed to just what you call the crackpots at the university?
You know, people will say that a lot. They'll ask because there's multiple ways, Payman, you can study history. You can study it from top down. You can study a people's history, right? The demographic changes, birth rates. You can study the history of war and how it's impacted borders, lives. You can study the history of technology. How did television or radio, how had that influence society? So there's multiple ways of studying society. And when I see a lot of this stuff, the UN, like Klaus Schwab and the royals and the elites, I will tell you right now, practically zero. In my opinion, and this is where a lot of people like they find me rather offensive. And what I say to them is, you don't have to go any further than your local school system, or you don't have to go any further than your local politician, and you will find out very quickly that just locally, your local politician will have nothing to do with you. Try to get an email response direct from a politician. You can't, right? Like most of the this is the sentence I will say. After the family, education has the single biggest influence on an individual, and in consequence society as a whole, right? So our education system here in Canada is probably the single most important institution that we have, and nobody barely takes any notice of it. When they're looking at when they're in a lot of these questions, they kind of leave the education system and they go more into the economic aspects of things. And again, I have a bit of a background in finance, and a lot of the real challenges that we're facing and why does it look so similar in Canada, Britain, France, Australia? Like people think it's a conspiracy when you're seeing, oh, why is it there's so much they want to regulate, freedom of speech? Like Britain looks horrific these days. Why do they want to introduce these same laws here in Canada? Right? What and people will look and go, oh, it must be like a global conspiracy theory with some group of globalist elites that are working together that want to take over the world. And then there's that immediate jump to oh, it must be the Jews. The Jews are behind everything. And I'm like, no, it's not, right? Like like they had a problem. And if you look at the history, David Walker, and it's very similar in the United States, the former Comptroller General of the United States, very important guy. He worked under George Bush, Barack Obama. I know those two presidents, right? Former Comptroller General, former head accountant of the United States, and he is saying similar things that what I'm about to say here. What ended up happening is in the early 70s, we went to these fiat currencies. The birth rate dropped underneath replacement levels. And this went on again, year over year, decade over decade over decade. During that time, into the 80s again, all these governments, in Ontario is a classic example, they turned around and they said, okay, we're going to make all these promises, pensions, benefits. We're going to healthcare, all these obligations that the government is taken on now. And what ended up happening is that these unfunded liabilities started to grow slowly, slowly, slowly. They started to get even worse into the 2000s. By the year 2010, what ended up happening is the baby boomer generation started to retire. They're going into retirement. And there's this huge population swath that started, born after 1945, and it went on actually to about 1970. So there's that 25 year uh, group where they were all, they were all born. They're all coming into retirement now, or they start in 2010, and it's going to go to 2035. So you're getting governments like here in Canada where they cannot have a population, even if you think 2 cents about or 2 minutes about it. You cannot have a population where you have one person working and one person, or two, heaven forbid, two people retired. And it's like that in France. It's like that in Britain and in Australia. So what's happening now is that these governments, and I've worked for companies and I've seen it before where they go bankrupt, and the reactions on how people start to behave. It gets very, very scary, Payman. Um, so they're running into these massive money problems. So now you're seeing this more debt that they're racking up, where they gotta literally print money to pay for all these obligations, and it's unsustainable. So the reason why, and it's like that in Australia, it's like that in Britain, it's like, again, all these countries, and they're bringing in all these immigrants, like all these immigrants that have come in starting at around 2015. We've literally added 7 million people. It's like bringing them all in and hoping that you just throw enough immigrants, enough Indians, and God bless Indians, Hindu people, right? I'm not throwing, I'm just talking accounting, dollars and cents, the way it's working. They're hoping that they're going to take the enough of these immigrants to throw it at this problem, that somehow it's going to solve itself, that they're going to start producing GDP and all this wealth to be able to fund your if you want, I can explain, like even use a universe example in detail. And that's why it appears similar in all these countries. Even in the United States, they're complaining about the immigrants coming in, but they realize the age of the population, the debts, the obligation. You have to do it, right? Not have to, excuse me, but it's the solution that they're looking at. And the reason why they're coming down with all these laws is that an ordinary Canadian, yourself, Payman, you're born here. Even a Hindu guy. Let's just say your dad was born in 1975, came to Canada in the year 2000. He's 50 and he had his first son at 25. So you're a Canadian-born guy, but your dad is Hindu. You're looking at this and you must be like, I'm like a battery, and these immigrants that they're bringing in are my replacement battery. And again, it's that taking out of religion, taking out of people were once creatures of God, children of God, right? That we're created in God's image, and that man should leave his mother and cling to his wife, and that this whole spiritual narrative around what it meant to be a human being, that is long gone. That's been pulled off, you know, back in the 70s, 80s, by the time 1990 rolled around, it was all gone. And what people are feeling is that they're being looked at as a replacement battery, right? You're a battery, or as Eric Weinstein referred to all the a young 25-year-old today, he's like a source of protein, right? So what they're doing is they're just coming in with these immigrants going, we're just going to replace you with these people, and people feel it like what you're feeling, really what's wrong is that you're feeling the effect of a secular society that sees its people as nothing that other than objects that need to be regulated. So all these things on freedom of speech that you're seeing in Britain and all that, it's like, too bad, people, too bad, British people. We have to bring in these immigrants. We have to throw them at the problem. We have the birth rate is an issue. We got bills to pay, and you are nothing more like than a and don't complain about it. Don't say anything about it, right? That's my take on it, right? Like I just look at it as a very, if you want, do you want me to expand and just break it down at a university level to be even more clear?
Go for it.
Or if that's clear enough. You can see in Ontario right now, and again, I'll use this example because I know it best, but it's the same everywhere. Where you take a university like Queen's or Laurentian University, wherever I went to, where there's not enough native-born Canadians, and I'll use the white Canadian. There's not enough white-born Canadian people to fill the seats at the university, right? So what they're doing is these universities, they're all gung ho on, yes, bring in foreign students, because the university now, they don't have enough white students or quote unquote Canadian born students, but they still have to pay for the professors, the pensions, the benefits, the salaries. You got to pay for the lighting. You got to pay for the janitor to clean the floor. You got bills to pay. So, and then what they want is they want to bring in these immigrant students in just to pay the bills to replace. And you're seeing this. You go down to Nova Scotia, you go down to a lot of these universities where you're seeing even this massive influx of immigrant students, and you're seeing all the debates on Twitter, right? Where they're like, oh, the students they're led, and it's the same in the United States. They're bringing in all these immigrant students. Donald Trump himself alluded to this, right, in the United States. He goes, they need to bring these students in. Why? Because there's not enough quote unquote white native born students to fill the seats. So, and again, it's like a business. Like they don't care. Like they got to bring these students in. They're going to bring money. They're going to get money from the government, fill the seats, get a degree in not necessarily transgenderism, but it could be in anything, computer science, and then push them out into the economy and create GDP, right? And that's where a lot of people, what they're feeling is, you're feeling right now the apogee of a secular society that has no notion of a human being other than an economic unit, right? That a battery, replacement battery, a protein source, a taxpayer, a revenue stream. You could be replaced by anything. Nobody cares. The family is unimportant, right? Like you're having your feminists and no one's defending the family. No, you're not having in your even the religious people to a certain extent, especially in Canada. Nobody's pushing back on any of this. But anyway,
Another
that's my attempt to answer that question.
another great comprehensive response. Let's see if there's anything else.
My face is red. I think it's because the first time I've ever done one of these, I'm getting excited.
Oh well, as long as you're not falling asleep, I'm doing my job right. Uh, dude, what about this one again from Prairie? What do you think about Quebec wanting to ban religion and symbols in public?
That's very complicated because I have a very intensive understanding of Quebec. Actually, on my website as well, I've written 2 books concerning the history of Quebec, the religious, what was happening. I met Jean-Paul Debien, who wrote a book called Les Insolences du Frère Hontel in 1958. Again, that's a different discussion, but he was one of the precursors to the Quiet Revolution, one of the first actually to, not the first, but among the first. But that's a difficult question to answer because the challenge in Quebec, it's their relationship with religion, which makes it a lot more complicated. I personally, I don't think this is a good idea. I don't think like the yarmulke, the burqa, the face covering, and just in my modest opinion, whatever it's worth, I do not. If it were up to me, I would ban the burqa. You can't cover your face. But I mean, if I can say this, payment, this is going to sound unusual. Sometimes when I see the Iranian woman, when they're wearing the headscarf, when they wear it correctly, it's like they're the 1960s Hollywood fashion model. When they wear the guy, like just today, being conservative, there's a certain amount of they just because they appear as conservative women when they're wearing that
You
headscarf.
get that nostalgia for Sophia Loren or something.
Yes, yes, yes. That's exactly it. That's exactly
Oh,
it. Like, so sometimes myself, like, because especially a lot of this revolves, more around the woman's dress. I mean, some of it when they're wearing the headscarf, it's like a symbolic representation where I'm not interested in dating. I'm interested in marriage and motherhood, which, in my mind, like there's something positive about, the headscarf, depending how it's worn. But yeah, I mean that question, payment, we can one day we can go into an elaborate discussion
all right.
about the quiet revolution and that.
Yeah, I really wanted to talk about that, but unfortunately, I have another podcast. Uh, I got a good question from Dale Richardson. He's talking about this is about feminism. He says, many well-meaning women have been deceived But this is the context of his main point. Feminism is very deceptive, and it is not what it is sold to be. I have done a deep dive into feminism and read into the history and the writings of feminism. It's theosophy at its core. I don't know what theosophy is. If you want to comment,
No, I'm not familiar with that word. Maybe we should just do a,
I thought you
you
would
know,
be. I put you on the spot.
no, but you know what? There's so the the one problem that I have with all these this let's just take a quick divine wisdom, eternal principles, core teaching. Okay, I mean, I don't know if it's, if, how much of a universality there is to it, but the only problem with a lot of these words, payment, is that you could spend your life now studying, like, it's like a language all onto its own. Like the all these different terms that everybody's using. I mean, I have my own set of vocabulary that I can, that I can use as well. If people want to, like, you can use some of these complicated words, but I try to avoid them, just because there's too many, and it becomes too complicated. But I mean, we can answer the first part of his question. Feminism is very deceptive, and I've done a deep dive into feminism, the real history writings, feminism, like a sisterhood or brotherhood at its core. Like, it's challenging today because the one difference is when it comes to women, their lives are a bit more complicated than men, in the sense that there is children, and there's a lot of economic questions that revolve around women as well. And that today, like, I just know myself, and I've seen it before, right? I'm old enough now where I've seen enough women that never had children, that are coming into their 40s, and that I just don't see it, like for men or for women. Like, we're meant to be married. Like, there's a very small percentage of the population that is really not meant to have children. Like, don't get me wrong, there is a certain percentage of women that should not have, they're just not, they don't have those maternal instincts, and it's the same for men, and they could push that energy into different places. But in terms of feminism, it is it's like, I just know the school systems, from everything I saw, everything I continue to see, they're not doing anything good for women, and it also has an impact on the men, right? The men begin to begrudge, and that's putting it mildly, womankind as well, right? You kind of have this vile battle of the sexes, which, and I call it vile because, again, if you're inside the university
There,
system,
there's no harmony anymore. Like whereas
yeah,
before, it was harmony. Now it's like a war.
like, I see it here. Like, part of the problem with a lot of the both the men and the women, and even more so, I would say for women, is that you have maternal instincts, right? Like, as a woman, like, to have children. Like, when I was 20 years old, there were a lot of these women. They're young women, and they have those natural maternal instincts. And really, it's like Camille Paglia said. They go, all these women, that's when they should be having their babies, between the 18 and 27, right? That's the healthiest. That's the best time for them to have their children. And what I see happening is, between birth control and then the politics placed on top of it, instead of putting all their energy, their maternal energy, toward raising children, they're putting it toward these, like, career, sure, but Instagram, OnlyFans, some bullshit ideological cause. Like, they're putting, like, those maternal instincts, that were meant to look after children, they're being pushed off into a different direction. And in the university system, I just saw that vile academic feminism. It doesn't do. We need a rehaul, right? And again, here, especially here in Canada, I don't see anybody. I am probably, payment, if I can. I'm one of the few people that's willing to say, when I went to university, and I was willing to do this like 15 years ago, right? Like, these professors, this is what they're teaching. My book that I wrote, and Lindsay Shepherd is another. This is what's going on, right? And this is what has to be changed, because for myself, and again, I don't mean to be a smarty pants. I'm seeing this as like, we're coming up to the end conclusion on what started taking place, right? In the, even back when I was in school.
So let's do one more question. I'm going to lump two questions together. The first one, you can address this if you like. It's from mpino7094. We need a good reality-based homeschooling curriculum to give our children a real chance. If anybody knows about one, please share. So if anyone knows, share it. You can speak to that if you like. And then there's another one from IKE remotely. What do you think about self-educating yourself through reading books on your own time? Do I really need a degree or a sheet of paper telling me I did a good job?
Okay, to answer the first question really quickly, it's kind of like the Benedictine option. Fold back onto yourself, take your kids, hide, do everything on your own. Sure, that might be a solution for some people, but we have to live as a society, and we can't live in a society where, you know, everyone's working remote, everyone's educating their kids remotely. We have to push back on the education system. What we would need is we would need an Abigail Schreier and a Lindsay Shepherd to be funded and to go to develop a proper education for young women and for young men. That we have to push back on the existing education system, and to have people say no, have a real public debate. This is what we as Canadian people want our education system to look like, and not what it looks like now. That's to answer that question. The second question, reading books in your own time. Yes, you can do it. Um, Self-educating yourself, which is pretty much what I've done. All throughout university, my entire education was almost like a choose your own adventure novel. Um, you know, you can do it, but the only challenge that I have with that is that, it, like some of the heavier books, right? And this is one thing that, if I could be a bit pretentious on this, that separates me from a lot of other people. I gave myself my own classical education, so I'm reading the Max Webers, the Thorstein Veblen's, the Emil Durkheims. Even though my university wasn't teaching them, I continued to do that all on my own. I read my Delaminés, my Jean-Jacques Rousseau's. Like, I've dabbled in a little bit of Immanuel Kant as well. And by doing it all on your own, sure you can do it, but the only I would reach out to some people if you're going to go down that path. Reach out to someone you respect. Reach out to someone who you think your morals and your values sync along with, and just say to them, recommend me 3 books, right? Just 3, and try to stick with, like keep it to a minimum. And what I call is your repertoire. And to be able to, if you're going to educate yourself on your own, is build your repertoire, because I don't know everything, right? There's some areas where I simply cannot speak to, right? Like there's many areas that, like we were saying before, there's so much out there, so much information. There's like a lot of political, straight up political theory I don't know, but get some books and master 2 or 3, and you're better off doing that than trying to, you know, every time you hear a buzzword, Michel Foucault, I got to read Michel Foucault. Like Jordan Peterson is the worst for that, because he throws out all these names, but I'm like, how many people can actually understand all of that, you know? But that's my
All right.
recommendation.
Thank you very much, John. We got through all the questions. I guess one final thing, if you want to tell people where they can learn more about you, and maybe do a plug for your books where they can buy them.
Yeah, if you go on seanfcloutier.com, that you'll find my website, you'll find all my books. If I were to recommend any one book right now to anyone that disparages or wants to understand my argument about the non-existence of Karl Marx, My Trump or Termite is probably my shortest book, and I made sure it was short just for today's attention span. 27,000 words, you could probably read it in a weekend. And it, I try to, in that book, it's like a polemic based in the style of a Friedrich Nietzsche, an Antichrist. And I just show you all the words that you're using, the entire Canadian mindset. It's more than just Canada joining the United States. It's like to help rework that mindset that people are stuck in. All these buzzwords, socialism, Marxism. I critique Jordan Peterson and Gad Saad, right? Like all the rules and regulations that Canadians have. And now Jordan Peterson comes out with 12 rules for life, and then 24 rules for life. And then Gad Saad has 7 rules for happy. Like, it's like the Canadian guy. It's like, here's your laws. Like, you're already at the bottom of the barrel, right? You're the racist, sexist, misogynist. You're responsible for all the problems. Here's Bill C-100. You can't protest. Bill C8, we're going to put you in jail for posting on the internet. Bill C36, Bill C21, we're going to take away your guns. And then Jordan Peterson comes along and says, here's more rules, 12 rules for happiness, another 24 rules for happiness. So that gives you an idea what my book is about. So if you pick up Trump or Termite, if you go through it, and it's fun, it's tongue in cheek, right? So I try to make it so it's funny at the same time. But that'd be a good starting point if anyone wants to get started in my work.
Well, Mr. Cloutier, I want to thank you very much for volunteering your time to come on here, and hopefully we'll have you back sometime.
Okay, thanks a lot, Payman.
Thank you, and a big thank you to the audience as well.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. I really, I hope you enjoyed our time together.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.